Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second day of this lovely event, Whose Revolution. My name is Anastas Vangeli. I'm currently a doctoral researcher at the Polish Academy of Science in Warsaw. I've been involved here very much with the movement Solidarność, and it's my honor to be here. Many greetings to the host. This is for Social Sciences and Humanities. I wouldn't talk too much now. I'd maybe have some questions in the discussion session. So I would like to give the floor to our panelists today. Do we follow the order of the program?
It's
So I think it'd be nice to open with Florin, actually. You have a broader region. Florin comes from Kritika Tak, and he's editor of Leftist, the regional leftist magazine dealing with Southeast Europe. We have a very difficult topic today, the actuality revolution in our current predicament. I was a bit scared.
Me too.
Yeah, so anyway, I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say, and yeah. Do we have time frame? 15 minutes?
Yeah.
15 to 20 minutes.
Okay,
maybe.
I'll try to keep it in there. Within 15 minutes. Hello, and thank you for having me here this morning, and thank you for organizing this event. I'm really glad to be here. I will just have a few general remarks to make mostly about our current predicament, the second part of the topic of the panel today, but also say something about the revolution happening or not happening. I mean, the good news, I think it's that we are living in revolutionary times today, but the bad news, and this is important, is that it's not our revolution, or not the revolution that the left expected. To answer very briefly and somehow to open up for later discussion, whose revolution is happening today is definitely not ours. It's a revolution from top down. It's a class war, basically, that is being waged by a minority of what we call elite, the 1%, the rich, the uber rich, against the rest of the population. Of course, the lines of divisions are not so simple, and I think this makes the whole situation very complicated. That is not a simple, what we would call classical Marxist division, a classical rupture between two classes, the proletariat and whatever we call the bourgeoisie, or some sort of owners of means of production and wealth. It's much more complicated than that, and the complication comes as an outcome of this class war being waged from top down, from above down. Because basically what is the main characteristic of this class war is precisely the acceleration and the imposition of class distinctions and class fractions within the societies. Basically, an affirmation of class division and the mobilization of class factions against each other. So I think we live in a class war, basically, a class division that is basically reproducing itself through its own existence, through its own imposition. So I think we live in revolutionary times. The question is how to take control of this revolutionary process, because obviously we're not controlling it now. It's being imposed upon us, as I said, by from top down. And another characteristic that I think it's important to emphasize here is precisely the fact that you have this kind of nested wars being waged from all levels. So basically, every class is fighting against the weaker link. So basically, you have a race to the bottom against the weakest in the society. So basically, these are the ultimate victims of this class war. To understand a little bit the history of this, I think we should go back to the moment of neoliberalism, which of course was the moment when this class project began. One of the ways I think it's important to understand neoliberalism was that it was a class project beginning in late 60s, 1970s, early 70s. That was basically, among other things, it was an attempt to get more control and get more power for the owning class against the workers and against the salaried proletarians, basically. So this was the moment of neoliberalism that began this open class war against labor, and I think it came to an end with the crisis of 2008. That was basically the death of neoliberalism. Maybe not ideological, or maybe some of the ideas that neoliberalism put in place continue to survive to a certain extent, or for a while. But basically, 2008, the financial crisis of 2008 was the death of neoliberalism. Austerity was an attempt to deal with this death. Basically, was an attempt to solve the crisis of the death of neoliberalism. But it was short-lived, and of course, it didn't achieve its goals. But what happened? What remained after this moment was, of course, this acceleration of class divisions and class war. This is the legacy of neoliberalism, that its demise basically, only what it did, it was only to reinforce it even more. So this is the legacy we have to confront now of neoliberalism being dead, but at the same time being very alive in its ultimate consequences, which is an overall class struggle. One of the characteristics of our contemporary moment today is this idea of populism, basically. I mean, I just want to go back to this idea, because basically what we witness now is a sort of blackmail politics. I mean, I will speak a little bit about this as well, about the blackmail politics that we face today after the demise of neoliberalism. So basically, there is this, what Arikali calls problematically, I would say, but still usefully use this extreme center, this kind of post-neoliberal order that is trying to represent itself as the only alternative, because otherwise we have the specter of extreme right populism, basically. So I think this distinction itself, it's precisely one of the ways in which class division is being reinforced, because this specter of populism is mobilized more by the extreme center itself than by the populists, right? I mean, populism is the specter raised by extreme center to keep at bay any sort of popular demands, any sort of aggregation of groups and populations against the common enemy. The specter is always raised in order to create these divisions. So I think this division itself should be inscribed in the way class war works today. It's not an innocent distinction. It's already inscribed in this particular mechanism of waging class war from above. So I think we should be very careful with this, with characterizing the situation today as some sort of right-wing populism against. No, I think the distinction itself, it's already part of the diagnosis of the situation, and I think this is also very dangerous to give in to this idea of, like, as I said, the politics of blackmail, because it's always the same. That if you don't do this, something bad it will happen. Either the populists will take power, the extreme right will come to power. Now nobody's afraid of the left anymore. I mean, that's another diagnosis of the current situation, that nobody fears some sort of leftist insurrection taking power. It's only about some sort of crazy leftists coming to power, and it's everywhere. You know, you just maybe it was a little bit with Sanders, but it's probably the only example where you can think of some sort of fear of the establishment that would come to power. Nobody cares anymore. I mean, it's just about inventing this strawman enemy, which is called the far right. I'm not saying it's not important, but to discuss about it, but it's always this kind of specter of the far right coming into the picture, and then we have this politics of blackmail, that if you don't do this, you have to really, that everything will be in chaos. And I think this is another very important characteristic of the current situation, which somehow established the horizon of our political imagination, either left or not, is this constant politics of fear. It's the only politics we have today is the politics of fear, either generating or managing fear. And I'm not talking about this only about this particular fears, terrorism, ecology, and so on, but it's more fundamental fear of the fact that everything is collapsing. There is nothing to be done about it. Everything is just going down, and what we need is a little bit of administration to keep us or to prolong the inevitable. There's no other sort of politics except for this administration of the disaster. You have or of the incoming disaster. So everything should be only temporarily managed because there's nothing to be done. And I think this really takes out all the energy of planification or of thinking ahead, of organizing for a lot of the left from its inception, basically. I mean, there were characteristics of the capitalist ideology and functioning to look long term. What is happening today is only this politics of fear that everything is collapsing and we only need some sort of bit of administration. And this politics of impatience that we have to do things now because otherwise it will be either too late or we'll miss the opportunity, we'll miss the moment. So it's this kind of permanent impatience and permanent injunction to do something now because otherwise it will be too late. And I think this really kills all the possibility for more articulate politics. It's only, as I mentioned yesterday as well, and it's definitely the case for the left, it's only a form of reaction. So you have to react to whatever is being put in front of you immediately, instantly, or otherwise it's either too late. So I think we're caught up into this game, not only the left, but I think everybody's caught up in this kind of permanent urgency, permanent situation of urgency to respond to what is happening. So everything also underpinned by fear and by this blackmail, constant blackmail that we face. That okay, if you don't act, something terrible will happen. Now I will say a few more things about what I think is the most, some of the most important, 3 or 4 most important legacies of neoliberalism or transformation that neoliberalism created and left us with after its demise. And I think they are crucial for understanding our current situation, but also to start to rethink a particular leftist response to them, to some sort of strategy to them. And then I will finish it with also an idea about how can we go back to this class politics in the current situation. So one of the very important things that neoliberalism did was to kill reform liberalism. I think we were not very aware of that, and I think you can be aware only because neoliberalism now got to its demise, to its end, and we see now the catastrophic collapse of neoliberal parties and politicians and politics everywhere. So we still have here and there some sort of phantasmatic dreams about how neoliberalism can still revive the economy or whatever, but nobody believes them. I mean, even what would appear to be, I'm not sure it is, but it appears to be a purely neoliberal candidate like Macron in France, that he seems to be like advocating this. He looks like the most utopian politician. I mean, in the debate between Le Pen or the others, even he looks like the most utopian and extremist in a sense, because it's like, okay, it doesn't solve anything. I mean, this is the case. Everywhere, I think neoliberalism it's more or less gone, but its legacy is very important. And you can see that we knew that the social democracy collapsed in late 80s, throughout the 90s, with this switch to Blairism, Clintonism, and so on, all these varieties of the third way that we saw, and then that collapsed as well before and during the crisis. So that's dead. I mean, pacification of the social democracy, it's obvious for everybody. I mean, there's no need to emphasize it, because everywhere social democracy is basically dead as political forms. I'm not sure about the ideas or whatever, this reformist Keynesianism idea that are still floating around that might be still there. But in terms of political organization and party, this is dead. I mean, there's no question about it. But what is happening even more now is that basically the neoliberal center-right, whatever it was called, is also dying out, also in terms of political parties and organization. And that was the moment when you can see that basically the importance of neoliberalism in killing this kind of reformist liberalism. Okay, liberalism had its moments of death or crisis in the 30s, and it was severely contested then. But then the post-war consensus was established on this kind of reformist liberal goals, centrist liberalism, basically, for most of the post-war period till neoliberalism crept in. So I think we only understand now how important this destruction of centrist liberalism made by neoliberalism from the late 70s onwards is today, when we basically, in the current situation, we have to defend or go back to liberalism. And I think you mentioned yesterday very well this idea that what was one of the most important elements of Marxism or leftism in general was to criticize this liberal framework, but somehow from within, right? It was the left appeared historically as a radicalization of, or an attempt to radicalize liberalism, to make liberalism fulfill its promises, to stand up to liberalism and say, okay, these are your internal contradictions, we should overcome it by having this radical discourse. I'm 2 minutes, okay, I will just then...
you can have more.
I will speed up a bit. So just to finish this, and maybe we can go back to it. So I think neoliberalism killed this idea of liberal reformism, reformist liberalism, whatever we want to call it, which puts us in a very difficult position today, because we basically have to defend at the same time liberalism while criticizing and keeping this. And I think this really takes out a lot of power from the left. Historically, the main enemy was liberalism in an attempt to overcome it. But now this is not possible anymore, because you have to defend in many places, you have to go back. So I think we're in a situation, unfortunately today, that we were before 1848, right, when the left actually appeared as an form to criticize liberalism after the demise of the bourgeois revolutions. So we're basically some sort of 1830s type of situation, and I will say also, I mean, it's not only this ideological or political way, but it's also in the forms that labor is organized, and maybe something that's much more wider than that. But we're also in a situation when, right, I mean, reform liberalism is that, but also this kind of organization of production and the way capitalism works that made possible this kind of massive proletarian types of organization. The flexibilization of labor that neoliberalism did, and everybody knows about it, makes more plausible to have forms of contestation that were appropriate for the 1830s. These small groups of, I don't know, it can be workers, it can be anything else, it can be an association of various people that, you know, what Hobson described as primitive rebels, people who organize in certain ways, is not very concentrated, is not striking a blow to the enemy, is not massive, it's just like some small of actions that can be interpreted as resistance, reactive, but they're in a sense very peripheral to the, and very localized and very disjointed in a sense. So we have this kind of moment, and I think this is the real legacy of neoliberalism that we should really come to terms with. because it really changed the whole situation for the left, but also for the whole political spectrum. Okay, very briefly, if I have only 2 more minutes. Okay, 3 more minutes. Then, okay, yeah. Okay. Another important thing, just very 2 last points. What neoliberalism did, one of the main effects it did, and it's also very important and relevant for the left today, is basically it managed to de-link state, laicite, this secularism and citizenship. You had this package which could be criticized, of course, and it was criticized from the left for more than 100 years. But this was one of the main pillars of reform liberalism or capitalism as we knew it before neoliberalism, that you have this absolutely untouchable triad: state, secularism, and citizenship. So, okay, you had this, various other variants that were, of course, criticized as nationalism and so on, but at least in theory, you had this triad of 3 key elements, and I think this was dissoluted. And what made what was the outcome was that not only that religion was allowed to come back in, but what neoliberalism did, and many analysts characterize it as such, was to open up this space for political religion. I mean, not the religion in the sense of, like, I don't know, gods and so on, but in terms of, like, a religious politics, and bringing this type of political manifestation into public sphere. Neoliberalism itself was a sort of religious manifestation, this belief of free markets and so on. So it had this absolutely religious underpin to that. And very connected to that, and this is the last point, it's the demise or the complete erosion of scientific idea, the attack on science. Neoliberalism, here its legacy is more complicated, but one of the outcomes was this dissolution of the belief in science. And we see it even more today, but it's not something that is happening today. It has happened for 40 years. And privatization of universities and so on, I think they're also a symptom of, it's not a simple story of just opening another market. It's that as well, but it's also part of this wider historical change that neoliberalism imposed, basically the attack on science. And we see it at this level of universities, which also was very important to take all the steam out of the resources of the left. Somebody mentioned yesterday, of the fact that there are no leftist professors, no this kind of classical intellectuals of the left we had in the 50s. It's part of that. I mean, it's part of this concentrated attack on science that really closed many spaces that were available for the left to articulate discourses, to articulate mobilization, to bring people together, like the students and so on. So these categories are dying out precisely because of this wider trend of attacking science. And when you have this attack on science, for example, we see a lot now in United States what's happening with this Trumpism and so on, which I think it's not neoliberal at all. I think it's really the embodiment of this new post-neoliberal world that we see today. It has nothing to do with neoliberalism. It's basically the overcoming of neoliberalism right now. But you see this end result of descientification, that like being against abortion, being against vaccination, to all the whatever crazy ideas they have, creationism and whatever, which is not a new idea, but it's coming now into the center of politics, and you can find many more. I think this is one of the outcomes, and it's really confusing because once you lose the ground of scientificity, you also lose the ground for making leftist arguments. Sorry for being too long.
Sorry for
no, it's fine. Because I talk too much, but I will.
Neoliberal invention in this whole. Anyway, thanks a lot for throwing all these ideas to us. I'm sure we're gonna have time to discuss more in the follow-up. It's Saturday, so it's I hope no one is in a hurry. Anyway, now I want to give the floor to Ivan Radenkovic from Georgia, from Novi Sad. We tried 15-20 minutes.
That's the reason why I put it down a little bit to discipline myself. Thanks for the invitation on this event, and thank you all. This was a good introductory and very good polemical introduction. In fact, I think the discussion will be hilarious because you claim the neoliberalism is dead, and this is very good point. We should discuss it a little bit more. My point of view will be more narrowed. In fact, that I have really troubles to put the question and the issues of the actuality of revolution in 20 minutes. So I tried to combine a little bit theoretical approach and some political actualities in recent political events and so on. Quite often people makes a reference to, in fact, George Lukács' phrase of actuality of revolution as a way of figuring out what needs to be done next, using the goal of revolution as the main focal point. I would argue that Lukács uses the term actuality of revolution to mean a specific period where real revolutionary possibilities have opened up. Questions like the party and the state then must be approached in completely and qualitatively different way, because the possibility of workers taking power is now on the immediate agenda. Lukács, who developed the theory of the actuality of revolution, is not referring to the general principle of trying to figure out the next concrete step to take a class struggle forward. In fact, he referred to a specific period, the revolutionary period, where questions of action are not just more immediate and important, but are qualitatively different than in non-revolutionary situation. And yet, the problematic of actuality of revolution revolves around its integral moments summed up in the vanguard party and the proletarian state, as we know. I'll just quote two important places about the party and the state from Lukács' book about Lenin. First, he says, naturally, even the biggest and the best party imaginable cannot make a revolution. But the way the proletariat reacts to a given situation largely depends on the clarity and energy which the party is able to impart to its class aims. When the revolution is in actuality, the old problem of whether or not it can be made thus acquires a completely new meaning. This seemed very relevant to me to make an argument on this very usual metapositional level when leftists or non-leftist intellectuals mainly thematize the question of revolution. In fact, this Lukács insight is completely at odds with the Kantian idea of contemplation of the revolution from a distance, where privileged position of a theoretical subject must be isolated in order to penetrate into a historical truth of revolution. Kant confidently looks at the French Revolution neither condemning nor condemnatory, not moralizing, not paternalistic. His look is filled with enthusiasm and personal confession. The French Revolution was historically irreversible event that shows that the human race yet progressed toward better. But this is only visible from the external point, or is the external subject, or the observer. The revolution cries for the other with big O, and his gaze. In other words, Kant says that the distance from the revolution is the condition of its recognition as a universal historical event. Consequently, the position from which can be seen purpose and meaning of a revolution does not coincide with the place of revolution. Kant separates the theoretical and practical aspects. Theoretical reflection and action does not belong to the same domain and does not occur in the same place. This does not mean that it is impossible for the revolution to be reflected among the actors, but that the measure and historical accolade of a revolution is outside of it. It's on another place. That place is based simply on the moral reaction and the distant other. For Kant, there is no synchronization between determination of the meaning of historical rebellion and an immediate involvement in the revolution. If you catch the meaning, then we are not involved in its occurrence. And if we are involved in its occurrence, then we cannot catch the meaning. Of course, all this doesn't bother Kant to elevate the French Revolution as historically legitimate realization of nominal sphere, as he said, the sphere of mind, of superior mind, although in his legal writings he explicitly rejected the right to revolt as illegal, in fact. He just wants to observe revolution outside of a revolution from this external point. Let's back to the Locus. His notion about the state. This little excursus on Kant was simply to distinguish this meta position in thinking about revolution that was something that Locus didn't do. The other thing, when he speaks about the state, I quote, "The actuality of the revolution expresses itself in the actuality of the problem of the state for the proletariat." With this phase, the question of socialism itself at once ceases to be merely an ultimate far-off goal and confronts the proletariat as an immediate task. These passages, and especially the question of proletarian state, are contested to a high degree not only by capitalism in its subsequent phases, but also by other Marxist thinkers as well. As a complete opposition to Locus, I will briefly introduce John Holloway's concept of revolution without taking the power. I think it's a good contrast to see this level of engagement of a proletariat and the revolutionary idea and this direct involvement, immediate involvement, from this other side which experienced a short 20th century and made very bitter consequences, very bitter lectures from this. I will speak about Holloway because his arguments circulate today among radical leftists, radical movement, and they resonate the core of a revolutionary strategy, in fact. Before 16 years, he wrote a book called Changing the World Without Taking Power. This is in some kind of homage to Zapatistas' upsurge in Mexico. The idea of refusing to take power was popularized by Subcomandante Marcos at that time, leader of the Zapatistas. Holloway uses these ideas to polemically tackle the ideas of revolutionary Marxism, in fact. What is the political position of Holloway in this book? Although Holloway has some critical remarks about autonomismo, Tronti and Negri, the intellectual parents of Italian autonomismo, his main argument comes directly from them, in fact. First, don't confront the power of the bosses in the world of the work. Withdraw from it. Create autonomous spaces, autonomous from the bosses, autonomous from the capitalist state, etc., etc. Of course, this means struggle, but not the elaborate apparatuses of political parties or taking state power, in fact. In order to sum up the arguments, we could split Holloway's 10 points in a following order. Reformism and revolutionary Marxism both have as their strategic objective capturing state or governmental power, but this is a trap. since the state is, according to Holloway, inevitably an authoritarian structure. And this is quite close to this bold standard anarchism idea. The second one, the state is not the locus of power, it's not the place of power, because the capitalist social relations are where power lies. This is the hardcore Marxist thesis which came from fetishistic character of a commodity and the reproduction of social relation, but we will eventually come to it. Orthodox Marxists don't see that the state is firmly embedded in the capitalist social relation and that merely capturing it changes little, since authoritarian social relations remain in place. This is Holloway thesis, in fact. The third one, capitalist social relations can only be changed by alternative social practices that are generated by the oppressed themselves in the course of resistance and struggle. Okay. The theoretical basis of this argument is the category of commodity fetishism, and its structure or a thing, but a relationship which is daily reproduced in the process of fetishization. He splits this aspect of a process as a revolution and the aspect of event as a revolution, and he keep it in constant disjunction. The point is, this reproduction is not automatic, according to him, and can be disrupted by alternative social practices and resistance. Another one, the claim by Engels and others that Marxism is a science automatically generates an authoritarian practice. The oppressed are divided into those who know, the vanguard, the party, and those who have false consciousness, the masses, in fact. A manipulative and substitutionist practice automatically results from this idea. Even Lukács and Gramsci couldn't break out this false problematic, according to Holloway. I will quote just one paragraph. He said, revolutionary movements inspired by Marxism have often had an instrumental view of the capitalist nature of the state. They have typically seen the state as being the instrument of the capitalist class. The notion of an instrument implies the relations between the state and the capitalist class as an external one. Like a hammer, the state is wielded by the capitalist class in its own interest, while after the revolution it will be wielded by the working class in their interests. Such a view, according to Holloway, reproduces unconsciously perhaps the isolation or autonomization of the state from its social environment, the critique of which is the starting point of revolutionary politics. This view fetishizes the state, it abstracts from the web of power relations in which it is embedded. The mistake of the Marxist revolutionary movement has been not to deny the capitalist nature of the state, but to misunderstand the degree of integration of the state into network of a capitalist social relations. And this all leads to the disastrous consequences for the movement itself. He says, what was something initially negative, the rejection of capitalism, is converted into something positive, institution building, power building, etc. The induction into the conquest of power inevitably becomes an introduction into power itself. The initiates learn the language, logic, and calculations of power. They learn to wield the categories of a social science which has been entirely shaped by its obsession with power. And here I will start to give some critique to these stances of Holloway. First, he silently passes over the problematic that revolutionary Marxism do not fight to capture the capitalist state, but to smash it. Well, this point is historically unstable and could serve as a good point for discussion, really. For him, the state is a transhistorical capitalist state, beside the fact that this state changes according to its regulation modalities and the accumulation regimes in order to maintain structurally essential relations of exploitation and social domination between the classes. So for Holloway, the state is unchanging category within which strictly limited sets of social relation can exist. His critique reads as if Lenin's The State and Revolution has never been written, in fact. But the Marxist concept of revolution is not that the working class smashes the state and simply replaces it with the worker state, through which social change can be effected. The concept of the workers' socialist state is the democratic self-organization of the masses and not the dictatorship of party. Holloway's argument is basically that if you have any kind of state, you have capitalist oppression. It's easy to see the illogicality of this argument. Let's abandon the idea of worker state and say we want the direct administration of social affairs by the democratically organized masses. Naturally, they will have to elect at some point recallable officials, have meeting in enterprises, offices and schools and vote on what to do. They may need some kind of a national assembly and elected officials of that assembly to carry out the executive functions, etc., etc. If all that is rejected, it is difficult to imagine how the basic functioning of society could be decided and effected. In fact, strangely, or perhaps wisely from his viewpoint, Holloway refuses or just doesn't discuss any element of a post-revolutionary society and the post-revolutionary situation, its decision-making mechanisms or administration. Because if you do discuss that, you end up talking about something that sounds very like some kind of state. And this is the problem of this Holloway position. This leads to a strange paradox in his argument, which Holloway is blind to. For the sake of the argument, let's say the Zapatista-based communities are a good model for changing the entire planet. Let's say we want to Zapatista's whole world, Zapatize whole world, or the whole of Mexico, in fact. But in Holloway's schema, you can't, because you would build in this process a state, a Zapatista state. So you evacuate national and international terrains of struggle, concentrate on the local and the particular, which can only lead to the capitalist class saying, thank you very much. Zapatistas are part of a way of movements that have multiplied over past 2 decades. What is true is that those anti-systemic movements do not revolt anymore against capitalism, they revolt against neoliberalism. Their revolt is directed against the deregulated financial flows, privatized service industry and escalating social inequality, or against a specific variant of the rule of capital established in Europe and America since the 80s. European Monetary Union is the most obvious example of this. The common currency and central bank design in Maastricht have created a very unique system based on imposing austerity measures that challenges the national sovereignty. The movements of the left can violently protest against this, as well as any kind of right movement as well. If not harder. But the solutions they propose are much less radical, and that's the fact. Right have clear remedies for strains that are produced by the single currency and massive immigration, exit from the euro, they say, and the end of the influx of migrants. In fact, those two demands are repeating everywhere. On the left, with a few isolated exceptions, such unambiguous requirements are left out. At best, they were reaching for technical adjustments to the single currency, but this proved to be too complicated, really, in order to mobilize a larger voter base. Concerning immigration, left quite shy showed a hint of a possible introduction of quotas, for example. Neither one nor the other for voters is not easy to understand. Voters in comparison to direct suggestions offered by right. For the anti-systemic movements on the left in Europe, the lesson is clear in recent years. If left do not want to lag behind the right-wing movements, it cannot afford to be less radical in the attacks on the system and must be coherent in its denial. This means dealing with the impossibility of the EU reform because EU is gone too far with its neoliberal construction. It should be disbanded before anything more can be built, either, as Perry Anderson proposes, fleeing from the current EU or reconstruction of Europe on different grounds, burning the Maastricht Treaty, in fact. Except in the case of further, deeper economic crisis, it is unlikely that we will see some of these scenarios made by left, in fact. And I think that is the real situation we're dealing with. Yesterday you mentioned this problem about it can be applied to European left as well, because while right is very clear and ambiguous in its demands, left are constantly in the process of construction. The arguments completely out of sync with the European problems, especially this problem that I mentioned, and the form of these demands are, quite dissoluted yet. We don't have some kind of a condensation. We have argumentation, but we don't condensate the political proposal as such. So I think that would be one of the topics we should discuss about the others. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to present my thoughts on this panel, which gave us a background knowledge, the research I did for my doctoral thesis with title Melancholy and Politics, as I was primarily interested in transformative potential of the marginalized and melancholic position of subjects and communities. But I also, recently, I am more interested in general approach towards the importance and the effects of affects in the realm of political, which are, for me, one of the domains that are left out from the left discourse, but not left out from the feminist discourse. So my claim is that for the revolutionary and transformative practices, we should consider and look more closely towards the domain, affective domain, and also the reproductive domain, and that we should do it through politics of care, which is opposite of politics of power, dominated in the today's capitalist system, or however we call it, neoliberalism or whatever. So why affective domain? I think that it is one of the fundamental aspects of our lived experience, and we cannot speak about politics outside of the lived experience. So emotions and our affective states are the basis of what we do. Emotions are practically, in its etymology, something that moves us towards something. So starting from this phenomenologic position, and intentionality of the affective domain and emotions. I also want to point out to the concept of intercorporeality that Merleau-Ponty brings us, that speaks about the inseparable position of ourselves and our bodies and our affective domains and emotions with the others that are part of our field. So intercorporeality for me is a point to take on to discuss and think about transformative practices and change. But you also pointed out that change is a relational concept and is possible only in the field of relations and because of experience. So when I think of the political, I think of experiences and practices more than concepts by themselves. And what I find very relevant is to think for what can be universal in terms of human experience, and that is affective domain, and how to articulate what is universal as human experience in the ideas and concepts of the left. Because our lived experience by itself can bring destruction and violence, and also and can also bring us solidarity and care. And it depends on the position, on ideological position, and the consciousness we have about those affective domains. Today, I think I saw that it is Freud's birthday.
Today,
Yes. And I would like to mention that his idea about our unconscious does not mean that it is irrational. It is something that we have also learned how to penetrate and how to reveal in the consciousness. So we need to, I think of this affective sphere as something that can be brought into our and articulated through our ideology, positions, values, principles, etc. And I think that this Holloway, which today I learned about, and I liked his position.
Me too.
Speaks about the social relations, but I think and possibilities of practices, revolutionary practices outside
of power
relations and outside the state, which I also think is my point of direction. I also think that we should learn and experiment with various practices, both in the social domain and which are driving from the reproductive sphere, and I will come to that point which is Silvia's Federici's actually argument, and but also the economic practices, because I think that if we want to overcome capitalism and its problems, we should learn and experiment with alternative economies, social economies, commons, cooperative economies, or something else, which we still didn't manage to invent and experience. Yes. And why reproductive sphere? Why the reproduction? Federici's claim is that capitalist system was built on the exploitation of women, which made it possible because of the care for and production of the workforce. So politics of care in these domains should be and can be our vision for what we should look into building new experiences and communities. And I was also inspired by the idea of Murray Bookchin and his take on building small local communities that also build this kind of social fabric and social networks among people.
Now the man who does not need an introduction.
And who doesn't have a presentation. Okay, thank you, Anastas, for accepting to moderate today. Actually, I did not prepare a speech. I could not. I can never prepare a speech for something like this. What I do is usually, I think it's also a problem of the construction of the way of approaching to different mathematics, and it is this way which you could say is a kind of Platonic horror approach that you have in unorganized material, and I took this from Katerina, that you try then to organize. So you have a lot of material, a lot of content. So today in these 2 days we talked a lot about different concepts. And then what do we do when we are left to face these many concepts, approaches, experiences thrown out in a discussion? How do we reorganize this material, which actually remains out there throughout these discussions, remains as an unorganized material? We did not have a task to put forward a strategy, to put forward a program, but we had the task to kind of throw out things and then and put forward challenges. So now we are faced with, now as a last speaker of this, we are faced with all these challenges, with all these topics that are thrown out, that we have to somehow organize as a whole. It's out there. We have to organize. And I think that maybe my task will be to kind of do a recap of all these things that we talked. Actually, I think that we have a niche that is for the involved discussion, is this dichotomy between a macro level of revolution and a micro revolution. I mean, we talk about taking over the state, taking over the power, the party form, and being indifferent to the state, being ignorant, or in Badiouian sense, remaining in distance with the system, and providing for different practices which might potentially trigger an event. So I see this sort of dichotomy that keeps on running, and this is not our problem. This is a problem that historically follows not only the left but humanity as well. And a lot of thinkers and philosophers have tried to tackle it. I think that one of them who tried to provide a hint, but then there were a lot of other thinkers who tried to make a positive content out of this, was Nietzsche, who tried to think beyond good and evil, beyond the binary model of thinking good and bad, the left and right, or the micro and the macro. And then Deleuze and Guattari tried to systemize this in the concept of the assemblage, and thinking that we might make micro-revolutions to have gone through some sort of lived experiences which will transform us subjectively, and then the complete sum of these micro-revolutions which might happen individually, collectively, in a small collective, will define the system at large, but then the system of this large molar level will come to also define the micro-instances which initially provided for this change. So it seems like it poses itself as a process of immediate correlation, that we cannot say that the micro-instances, the individual subjective affective experiences will definitely define the macro level, will definitely change the party or change the state, or the state will change this, but they are in constant sort of immediate correlation, that this define the state, then the state or the system or the party comes to define or redefine the individuals in the new meaning that has been brought. And this has been sort of in the last School for Politics and Critique that we had in Ohrid. We talked about the visions that the revolutionary partisans had before the establishing of the Socialist Federation, that their visions were way beyond of what the Federation and the system codified as a socialist system, as a mode of state. And this usually is being used as a criticism against the Yugoslav Federation, that the visions of the partisans were way beyond, were more progressive, were more socialist, were more looking towards the future, but the system kind of left behind these visions that existed during the fight, during the 45 especially, and throughout the production of the literature and the art. This was visible, and you could read this. But actually, and then is this same argument that the system later came to codify and to identify the whole processes with the result that it itself brought about. But actually, I'm fine when we criticize sort of the result of a system, the result of a process, that we had different visions, there were different visions of the partisans, but that the system that this process brought about lagged behind these visions. But actually, I think that this is a good step. We have to think of it in non-finite terms. That this was the maximum of a step that collectively we were able to take. But individually, we maybe had some sort of different visions. But this actually, taken into consideration what was present before, this is a step forward towards a certain horizon. And therefore, this configuration that happened, we should not look at it in finite terms. And from there, if we do not take if we take a non-finitude approach towards a certain result of a revolutionary process, then we can explore actually the different varieties of experiences, of processes, and of strategies. And here I think we have to bring into one union the different concepts of affective experiences, of lived experience, of political strategies, of parties, that we don't have to look at hierarchies, that it is first and foremost the Leninist strategy which we should strive forward and reproduce in our current predicament, and then it is another level, the level of collectives, smaller communities, and then there is a third lower level of affective experiences and lived experiences and affective becomings. So I think that this whole register of different categories we should put in one union and then see what we can build from this and how can these categories of different registers work together. Because I completely agree with all of you today and yesterday. Therefore, I think that we cannot split the party devotion from the personal experience. We cannot split the party strategies and tactics from the neoliberal codification of the territory in which the party functions. But this codification of the territory in which the party functions also codifies the territory in which the individual functions, in which we experience our everyday lives. And then we, as in this case, members of party or members of an organization or an action group, we still kind of sometimes get into the trap of reproducing this domain which capitalism or its latest form neoliberalism imposes upon us. So I think I have some references here also to talk. There was this interesting French guy, me and Katerina once wrote an article together on the concept of the right to the city. They asked us to write about the separation of the city or how we experience the city. Katerina was asked to write how she experiences the city as a Macedonian and me as an Albanian. We were like shocked, like we can write how we experience the city together in a different domain, the transformation. And the article was called The Struggles of Skopje. And actually we took of course, from Henry Lefebvre, the concept of the right to the city. And this was an interesting guy because he, ideologically thinking about the revolution, he started to think of the revolution through the Communist Party of France. And he was a member of the Communist Party of France. And if you look at his biography, it is an interesting shift. He starts as a member of the Communist Party of France, and he writes about the party. He writes about the necessity of the political party, about the necessity of this high-level intervention where you take over the state. And then we all know what happened with the post-68 depression among intellectuals. So he was one of them as well. After the 1968 revolution in France, all the intellectuals, Althusser, him and others, got depressed because they thought, okay, we had all this social upheaval and it didn't bring about for the Communist Party to come in power. It resulted basically in a lot of intellectual frustration and depression. So then Lefebvre went from the concept of the party, of the large-scale intervention, to the right of the city. And he considered the city as the domain. And we see today also David Harvey still considers the city as the domain and the urban struggles as the domain.
Rebellion, urban rebellion.
Urban rebellion. So he went to the city and considering the cities as some kind of organic structures which can on themselves reorganize if there are enough practices, transformative practices, which can reorganize the life in the city in a different manner. And then he got disappointed also from this level of the city and went to write his last book, Critique of Everyday Life, and said, okay, now the revolution is not at the party level, the revolution is not at the city level, the revolution is at the level of everyday life. So I think that this line of disappointments, many of us have lived this. We have, me personally, I had dreams that the left party in Macedonia will do this, will take the charge and probably bring for some sort of change or shift in paradigms in Macedonia. Then it was like, okay, let's do it with Solidarnosc, the smaller group, let's change the practices, let's provide for a space which is emptied of the neoliberal tendencies and neoliberal practices and formations. And then after this, okay, let's do something individual, let's transform my personal experience in the space and then try to find some sort of principles out of this experience and try to coagulate it with other experiences. And I think that another reference which is interesting to this division, which I think, again, starting from Nietzsche, is interesting to collapse the micro and the macro level. It is interesting because I think that we usually then, as left, get into discussions endless and into accusations which are, okay, you are Stalinist and you are anarchist. These are the most extremes of the accusations. If you try to advocate for personal experiences and like bodies in the streets, buffer and all these things, then it seems like you are not so serious because you don't challenge the formal stage of politics. Mm-hmm. Or if you only stick to the formal stage of politics and you stick to disciplining, you have to adhere to this sort of voluntaristic political strategy, then at this position you, from the guys on the other level, you get accused as being the Stalinist. So I think these two, this dichotomy of how we should pursue a sort of revolutionary path. Should it be personal, small collective, or party, national or international, remains all the time as a dichotomy which I think at one point we have to philosophically or theoretically challenge and see what happens when we collapse these two possibilities or these two paths which have always been there. Sometimes we have the huge enthusiasm for the party, and sometimes I'm a Leninist, and sometimes I'm an autonomist. So I find myself, in what Anna was talking, in an affective challenging myself. So sometimes I think of my actions in the future and past as trying to pursue them in a more Leninistic way, that we have to do things by discipline and diminish all the affective senses. And then on the other hand, I think that we should explode with our affective and libidinal possibilities, which will then kind of reconfigure the whole system in a new way. And this is very important. We know basically what is to be done. This is not a question. We know we have to pursue a revolutionary path. We have to speed up and accelerate all these actions at different levels. At the level of party, at the level of smaller organizations, communities, individual actions. But the problem is today, where do we find the energy for this?
Of course.
And I think what Anna hinted in a little bit, and this is, I think that we have to find the energy in the very basic biological substances that we are built of. But again, this is where I will end. Try to make a link of this micro and macro. Of course, we all individually carry this basic predicament of a collective, because we all have this kind of substance in ourselves, and that is the basic predicament of a collective, because we all have the same substance. But we need a political organization of all these, let's say, libidinal energies in order to provide a space which assemblages this in a sort of revolutionary, not organization, revolutionary drive in historic sense. We'll end up here.
Thank you very much for trying to synthesize and then address what the other panelists said. I thought that would be my role. So now I realize I have to invent myself a new role, and that new role would be, I don't know, maybe to bring in China to the discussion. I have also, it was a very great introduction, and I'm happy we have like about an hour, because we started half an hour later, right?
Yeah.
So if we extend, we have maybe, let's say, half an hour to hour for discussions, but I'll try not to take up too much time. So I have taken notes, and I think everyone said very interesting things, and I could address them, but let me just, of course I would always bring China into discussion. So, let's say you're an alien from Mars or Venus or whatever, and you come to this blue ball called Earth, and first you realize, okay, the people don't live in the blue territory, they live on the brown and green territory, and realize, okay, so where do I go, which is the biggest country, which is the main language, and there was actually an Italian movie where aliens come to Earth and they go to the biggest country, which is China. And then you go to China and you see hammer and sickle everywhere, red stars. You read the constitution of the country, which says this country rests on the principles of Marxism, Leninism, Mao Zedong thought, Deng Xiaoping theory, and so on. You read that the president has a PhD in Marxism, and so on. And there is something into it, I think it's kind of also a neoliberal conspiracy from the 90s to make us everyone think that China actually is not really communist, because that was their way to justify how to keep on doing business with China the whole time. But that's a topic for another discussion. What I was trying to say is what you were talking, and thanks a lot for bringing in John Holloway, because that was one of the first authors that got me into leftist thinking and Zapatistas and so on, years ago. There is something in his thought which I also paradoxically see in China, which is something that may be ascribed to a civilizational kind of difference. which is a non-Western thinking. One of the core pillars, for instance, is the Chinese concept of contradiction, which I think is very much similar to what, let's say, the concept of contradiction in indigenismo and these anti-colonial approaches, which is, the concepts can be both and. It cannot be, it must not be always either or, in the sense, and this is how I think this social autonomous spaces could work. The society can be corrupt, but at the same time we can also have parts of it that are not that corrupt. And in that sense, I do agree that, for instance, John Holloway would have this kind of hippie, always has this hippie aura.
Yeah.
So I think actually the title of his book should be Change the World Without Taking Power Right Away. At some point you should take power, but the change actually starts without taking power. And that's what I see when I think about the Chinese Revolution, but also at China as a global actor and changing the world. Another aspect of the thinking is, you mentioned Kant, and you touched a bit on this as well. What I see as a very core difference between inductive and deductive thinking and strategy for the world. We kind of have all internalized through all these neoliberal techniques, this really, we have German foundation, this really German blueprint-based thinking, strict rules. Basically, you have to have a plan where every comma matters, every bullet point matters, and then you try to fit the reality to the plan. Whereas, much outside of the Western civilization, you have inductive thinking, which is actually more natural, if I can use that word.
More empirical.
Basically, and that's actually also the slogan of the Zapatistas and of John Holloway, Preguntar caminando, which I think means walking we ask.
Yeah.
You enjoy you of course have some destination in mind, but you're focused on the road rather than on the end destination, and that's what drives you.
He always talk about the process.
Yeah,
in fact.
And I would also bring another thinker and another notion, Ernst Bloch, and his notion of non-simultaneity or non-synchronicity, which parts of the world, parts of the society can change before others. And when you zoom out, you see a picture, but those realities are many. They're plural. And they have different trajectories, and sometimes they don't even correspond to each other, despite maybe physical proximities or whatever. And so that was my input, a bit of non-Western. And one thing. Before I give the floor to the audience and to the panelists, something about the Florin said, and I very much agree, though I don't agree that the bad guys are not anymore afraid of the left. They're very much afraid of what the left has to offer, but they're not afraid of the leftists. Because the left has, what you also mentioned, a bit of this, but the left has become too nice and has given up much of the potent and dangerous weapons, and has made a lot of concessions, given up many topics to the either liberals or nationalists, far right.
Of course.
In the sense, that could be traced back to the 90s, when in the wake of the collapse. The lie of the collapse of communism, going back to China. What really happened in 1989? Did communism collapse? That's another thing we can talk about. In the wake of this narrative, okay, communism is over, again, which is not. So that was the first step, buying into the lie that communism is over. Then you give up, you build the third way, okay, we don't really use sharp language, we make a lot of concessions, so we try to be the nice guys, reformists, and so on. So basically, if you see who leads the discussion, let's say, on some core principles of what used to be the left, let's say, class or sovereignty, you have that in Le Pen or even in Trump, paradoxically. If you see who talks about justice, who talks about governance, the education, it's liberals. So many of these themes are basically given up, and we retorted to rethinking some of the core issues. So yeah, I mean that's another lesson that I think should be learned. And you have the paradox of the extreme center and of the militant liberalism. We've even given up. I think this was very visible in this city, in this country. We've given up the idea or the sexiness of revolution, the term itself.
Yeah.
We had a revolution that was organizing press conference, and you had an email from the revolution. So that's why I said to the organizer, why didn't you put a seat for the revolution to come? You can send the revolution an email. It was so banal. So, but we gave up because we don't talk about revolution because it's a thing of the past. So that's when you have liberals talking about revolution. So yeah, I mean those are my 2 points. And if you agree, I saw it was more of a comment than a question. But yeah, I would like to open the.
Liberalism is dead. I actually strongly disagree with this, and I think it's exactly the opposite. I think that neoliberalism is alive and stronger than ever. And yeah, but before we talk about this, I think it's necessary to define neoliberalism because we should know what we are talking about. And the way I understand neoliberalism, which I think is the most common way of understanding it, is through economic policies which favor the rich or the capitalists or the top 1% of the people. And these economic policies are policies that call for privatization, for scaling down of government or the state, for lowering labor rights, deregulation of markets, lower taxes for the rich, things like that. And yeah, these policies started since the end of the 70s, towards the end of the 70s. They had their culmination in the 2000s, and then we had the financial crisis when neoliberal policies and neoliberalism entered a crisis, which I agree with you. But then I think it's wrong to say that neoliberalism died because the policies that we have right now are exactly the same policies, or maybe even stronger, or more such neoliberal policies than before that. Just think about Trump. What is Trump? Trump is embodiment of neoliberalism because he calls for recalling Obamacare, so lowering government expenses on healthcare. He calls for deregulation of financial services or banks, which Obama did. He calls for lowering taxes for the rich. So it's exactly an embodiment of neoliberal policies. Then you have Theresa May in England, which says exactly the same. Then you have austerity throughout Europe. Then you have in Greece, Syriza is dead. You have Neo Demokratia again. So basically, wherever you turn, it's the same neoliberal policy, just on a higher scale. And I think it's very important to understand that neoliberalism is alive and stronger than ever. Because if we say that it's dead, then we can say we triumphed, we won. But if we understand that it's stronger than ever, we have to admit that we failed. If something is dead, it's the dead. It's the left. I wouldn't say that the left is dead, but I would say that it's dying. And why I'm saying this? Because just think about where we were, where was the world in terms of the left 2 years ago, where it stands now. So 2 years ago we had Syriza coming to power in Greece. We had Podemos rising, and everybody was talking Podemos to come to power in Spain. We had Corbyn in Britain, we had Bernie Sanders, we had the left rising everywhere. Then again, what we have today, Syriza is weaker than ever, Corbyn is lost, Bernie lost, Mélenchon lost in France, we have left nowhere. And so what I'm saying is that the left is dying slowly, and what we need to understand is why this happened. And if you ask me, the main reason why this happened is because of Syriza, because of the mistake, the main mistake Syriza made. And that was the thing with the referendum, when they the story, they had a no on the referendum, and then they went with the austerity program. So that was the main mistake. And why was this so important? Because people everywhere from the world kind of tried to start believing in this neoliberal dogma that there is no alternative. Syriza came to power, tried to change the system, it didn't succeed, so there is no alternative. So this neoliberal dogma, there is no alternative, kind of triumph with what Syriza did. And we need to understand that this failure was, this was the real failure. This was the real mistake. But we also need to understand that, so we must not repeat this mistake, but we also need to understand what made Syriza so strong, how Syriza came to power. And Syriza came to power because it kind of entered the mainstream, it became the mainstream party. It wasn't like this marginal or, too radical party, which was unattractive to anybody. But it became, the sexy party. Everybody wanted, Syriza. Everybody liked Syriza. And that's the road for the left in the future. So we have to learn from the mistakes, but that doesn't mean we should throw away everything from the past. We should just take the good, the positive things from the past and throw away the bad, the negative things.
Florin, I agree with your diagnosis of the situation globally. And the fact that we find ourselves now facing false choices between the extreme populist right and the extreme neoliberalism is trying to survive in the form in which it used to function. So basically, ideologically and economically, the offer is the same. We have just two different packages of the same. What is your proposition? How should we address the situation? Should we make a choice between these two false choices? What would you recommend the choice to be? Do you consider that these retro-neoliberal choices like Macron would be more reformist? Because I assume you were advocating for some sort of return to liberal reformism as a solution to the situation, or would you suggest some sort of, acceleration of the negative, or complete abstinence from the choice?
Brana's comment on Syriza through Anna's presentation, which fascinated me. I think that when we are at the domain of these social movements, which Syriza was a part of through many years before they came into power, there was the domain of, these affections. The Syriza was part of the largest anti-fascist, anti-racist festival in the world, which takes part in Thessaloniki until 3 years ago. No, it's not, because it was expelled. So what was the shift that Syriza, I take this as an example, that Syriza was expelled? Because they had to take a step forward. They had to go inside the system. But I think we have to see the Syriza guys as heroes, not as traitors. Why? Because they entered into a stage which was alienated from on the side. Not only at European level, but at the global level. The whole pressure was on the next Greek government, not to attempt to erase debts. So there was the whole pressure, which will be the next government with which we will negotiate the new bailout. So Syriza had to fight the social context which brought the conditions for Syriza to arise. But then this, in the context in which we live, the globalized context, when they came to power, they faced another context which was extremely alien to them. So, of course, they were defeated at this second level, at the context where the enemies were ready with the machetes and waiting for them. And of course, not only Greece, whichever country would elect such a government would face the same experience. But what Syriza did is that at one point in time, it materialized all the sort of wishes and dreams of the Greek people. What happened with the referendum is a clear example that you cannot have, and then we know this from history, socialism in one state. Because what would the Greeks have to do? What would the government have to do? It would have to kind of bail out or bankrupt the country, and then it would face the whole attacks from the World Bank, IMF, European Central Bank. So I don't think that we should look at Syriza as a bad experience. We should look at Syriza as a good experience of how the process of the left coming to power looks like, and then learn what are the challenges of a contradiction of a left in government in these times. And then from there try to draw new strategies of how they could allow, because they claim this all the time. They said, us only in power in Greece, we cannot do anything. So that's why they supported Podemos there, they linked with the Linke, because they attempted to create a European-wide anti-austerity coalition, which, as Florin said, this was a lower bar, because anti-austerity means against what? Some capitalist Keynesian policies. It's not an anti-capitalist communist politics. So I think that we have to, at the very first instances, we were all extremely disappointed and angry with Syriza, but I think now we've had time enough to analyze what happened and why the situation is as it is in Greece.
Possible, and I will not insist on Syriza because I agree with the diagnosis. I think it was a complex situation there, and blaming them for that. I would say few things about your questions, and I try to answer yours as well. First, I think what is happening now, okay, you mentioned that 2 years ago the left was in a better state than it is today. Could be the case, I don't know, my interpretation is this: I think the left completely died in 2009 when they were not able to, 2008 and 2009, when they were not able to capitalize on the popular discontent following the crisis. So that was the moment when you could see that, except for particular movements, I could describe Syriza, Podemos, and a few others in different countries, that had some sort of anti-austerity message, and they managed to get into power or close to power based on anti-austerity measure, and that's important, right? This was the outcome of the crisis, or the solution to the crisis. So I think the fact that they was not able to capitalize on the popular discontent following the crisis, it meant its complete demise, the way we knew it. And what I think died is not the left itself, not the idea and so on. What I think it died then was precisely the type of left that was inaugurated by these 1968 movements. So I think this was, so if neoliberalism collapsed then, I think also with it collapsed this kind of post-1968 left. This is finished. This is absolutely finished. Okay, some signs were before there, but I think this was the precise moment when it's done. And you can see this including in the current searches of the left, like what people are talking about parties again, going back to, if you look at the references today, there are Rosa Luxemburg, there are Lenin, even before that. So it's a different question, the left of post-68. So I think it's a process of rearticulation. I think it will take a lot of time, but that particular left is dead, and I think the crisis killed it. I will not go into this debate about neoliberalism, and we could probably talk about it forever. What are the key features of neoliberalism, either in economic terms or ideological? I think it was a very contradictory phenomena. It had its salient features, but at the same time it had things, for example, ideological, rhetorically, neoliberalism was against the state or weakening the state. But if you look in practice, basically it was only weakening the left hand of the state, as Bourdieu called it, like this social security. Exactly. Reagan was doing this kind of military Keynesianism in terms of foreign policy. So it was a very contradictory thing. I would insist that it died, and I would say why. Not by looking at these particular features, but if you look historically how neoliberalism appeared, it appeared as a solution, as an attempt to overcome a crisis, a capitalist crisis of the 70s, following the oil crisis and
crisis of profitability.
Exactly, the crisis of profitability. And you have the same situation today when we live in a crisis, basically, a prolonged crisis of profitability again. So neoliberalism was a response. It prolonged or rolled the ball further, but now it's finished as a response to that crisis. So now you have another crisis of profitability looking for another answer, and if that will happen or not, that remains to be seen. But I think as a response, as a general response of the capitalist class itself, neoliberalism is finished. And you can see in Trump or the names he invoked as well, you have neoliberal measures, but at the same time they talk about building infrastructure. May talked about a new reindustrialization of England. So you have different ideas now coming up in order to articulate a vision that will be able to go over this crisis of profitability again. So that's what I'm saying, or at least from this perspective, I'm saying that neoliberalism is that because it was a solution to a crisis that is not in front of us anymore. It's a different situation. So we had, okay, so it was this question about the false choice and what to choose between the two. I don't think, there's no choice, obviously, between two false choices. There's no choice to be made. I think we just need to focus somewhere else, basically, and rethink the left. And I think what is very important today is to have this kind of articulation of a diagnosis of what's happening. To see these phenomena as what they are and not fall into this trap of, oh my God, this moral panic, the extreme right is coming, the fascists are here and there, because it's really, really much more complicated than that. I'm not denying the reality of fascism, but sometimes it can conceal a lot of things. And I think the first step to do something as leftists is to reclaim, as you very well mentioned, at least this idea of class politics. It's so fascinating how the idea of class and the mobilization of class is now in the hands of the right. Trump, Le Pen, they all have a class discourse, and they mobilize class elements, and they talk about class struggle, and they talk about class politics on the right. It's not a new phenomenon. It's not like unseen before, but it's completely new in the sense that the left abandoned it completely. The left doesn't speak in an orchestrated way, in an organized way about class politics, and actually mobilizing these class fractures for for gaining political power, or at least political purposes. So I think rediscovering at least this language of class would be important. And I would like to make a pivot to your presentation, and actually have a question on Luca, because the way I understand that's how I think the link comes in, because what I see now, it's as I said in the presentation, the class war waged from above. And for Lukács, precisely the existence of classes within capitalism represented the guarantee that the revolution will always be actual. So the actuality of revolution is the actuality of class struggle. But the context now is that this class struggle is being orchestrated from above and from the right. So the question would be, it makes sense that the actuality of revolution is there because we actually live this revolution. But how to, reinterpret it from this perspective of Lenin and Lukács?
Well, that's interesting question, especially about the notion of proletariat as a historical subject of a revolutionary change in Lukács. I think it's a lot of Marxist tradition, contested that notion, that ontological Lukács notion about the proletariat and the class consciousness as some kind of a potential for a radical collective political change. And it's done on the basis that are more structurally essential for the way of interpreting and fighting against capitalism. Of course, it has its historical sequence, different historical sequence now and before 100 years, and we have this right now. We have this problem of how you interpret class classes.
Right.
You know, you have the whole discourse dissipation of a class as a notion, so you have a lot of interpretative delirium of what class is about now. So we can enter into this problematic, but on a conceptual level, I think it's today much bigger problem than just what I've mentioned before. This attitude of a contemplative revolution. We have another distance right now, which is exactly what reflects the actual state of affairs. We cannot see the future. In fact, we have a distance from the future, not like Kant, a distance from the revolution, then a distance from the future or what has to become. You know, we have. I can see that there is some interpretative delirium of what is non-revolutionary situation and revolutionary situation. You said today is the time, we are in revolutionary situation, the conditions are fulfilled, crisis is here, crisis constantly, and so on, but we have problem with energy, we have a problem for mobilizing masses, we have a problem with fetishism, we have a problem to create at elementary level intersubjective space, you know, in order to overcome this fetishistic logic of, you know, world upside down. In fact, how you create intersubjective space, intersubjective levels, and I think it's very hard to reconceptualize Lenin politics right now. That's my position. I don't see how this could be done because there are so many Marxists who tried this, but in fact, you know. There is, again, John Holloway, who says at the beginning of the book, well, how to change the world without power, I don't know. And in the end of the book, he says also, okay, is it now more clear how we change the society? No, I believe that this story has a bad happy ending. It's not a good happy ending. So I think that this only negative dialectics of thinking a revolutionary situation is something which is good for these micro political levels, but it certainly neglect the power of the state, the power of the national state, especially the power of a national state, competing national state, this neoliberal national state, and what is left of this state right now. So I'm in a puzzle with it, how to reconceptualize this.
So let me pick up upon some of the things mentioned. First of all, Trump and giving up topics, I mean, something of what you guys said, but I mean, we have to give credit not just to Trump, but to this whole new type of right for actually doing the job we didn't do. And this is giving a really solid diagnosis that are also comprehensible and has the mobilization potential. And if you see, and if you talk, and not just see the public act, but if you go deep in the influences of all these figures, also in Europe. I mean, for me, fascinating has been the Hungarian case of Viktor Orban. If you see their analytical process is actually really sound, and the way they reach conclusions is very much on point. Though their prescription is what is completely the wrong side, and the way they practice it is even worse. But again, I think, I mean, we repeated it many times, yeah, this is what we have. The left has allowed, because we were also trapped in being, as I said, and Syriza was also too nice, and Syriza, what you mentioned, Artan, I say they didn't read actually Poulanjas, they didn't read the most important Greek Marxists, they didn't read the theory of the state.
Yeah.
They, I mean, Poulanjas is I think a core reading, because I mean, he couldn't bear he ended his life because he couldn't bear the difficulties and the impossibility of what we talk about and the desired outcomes. Basically, once you enter the state, I recently heard a very good comment, the outside world can end, but bureaucratic structures will continue to exist with their own mentality and their own problems and what they deal with. What we talk about here, once you enter, bureaucracy is completely irrelevant. The outside world is completely irrelevant to those who sit in the institutions. I mean, and once you can even we'll talk about experts and once you get into the position, even the highest position, you can be the smartest, the whatever guy. You have a whole structure below you, which you cannot replace wholly. You cannot be totalitarian and say this has to be done because of rules and procedures. And sometimes, if you read first-hand accounts, it's like secretaries and these clerks that we despise and we don't even want to think about them that can dictate policy. And on the other hand, what you also see in the case of Syriza is another failure of the left giving up the notion of the interconnectedness of power and the limits of politics within the realm of a nation state. Mm-hmm. Because Syriza was faced with a tremendous coercion by a non-entity, the Council of Ministers, as Varoufakis said, they don't have an ad. You cannot sue them because they don't exist, but they exercise power. Yeah. And this is another instance where the left has failed. With the end of Soviet Union, we must not forget the emblem of the Soviet Union was the globe. The original goal of the Soviet Union was to become a global state that would eventually abolish itself at the end. But after that, regardless of how failed or bad that idea was, or was bastardized with Stalin and whatnot afterwards, after that, there is no... we talk about global capital, globalization, the paradoxes, but there is no awareness. I think globally, locally, but in the realm of power, at some point, especially if you're a party, you have to engage in this global politics, and that was actually, I think, the lesson that you win power, but at the end of the day, the capital knocks on the door.
Yeah, that's the same situation with the trade unions and their international way of doing things. They're completely unaware what globalization means, what wage differentials means on the international level. They're unaware, and it's not just critique based on unawareness of a trade unions, but the crux of things is that globalization and segmentation of a productive way of doing production on a global level is so complicated to comprehend, especially for the working class and their traditional organization, because most of the trade unions who are the strongest trade unions, like industrial North American steelworkers, they advocate really neo-protectionist politics, and all their politics is connected to this tight cooperation with the state, keeping their national interest. They do not think about, what if states succeed to raise our wages on a national level? They do not think that this will immediately lower wages in the third world country, in the global south, and so on. And I think it's a great problem, especially in globalized world, to speak at the level of the trade unions about the international solidarity, because this means nothing. This is completely empty signifier. As this famous case in Bangladesh in 2030 already showed up, because under the pressure of the trade unions, North American steelworkers, industrial, and so on, Barack Obama introduced the import tariff to Bangladesh, and the figure of this import tariff exceeded the annual wages for all those workers who work in the textile industry for American market, in fact. And it was a cynicism, in fact. I think that most of these traditional workers' organizations are towards some kind of nationalism. That's not something new, but with this new protectionist politics, it makes things even worse.
Yeah, just to add a point, and this is where actually, left-wing policies in one country can have a negative spillover effect. For instance, you have leftist reformist government in country A, which introduces really high standards of labor, protection, and whatnot, and then you have companies moving to somewhere in Asia where they build sweatshops and to restore profit. But anyway, how are we with the time? I have to ask the organizer, because we have to cut. All right, that's the bad news. Good news is we have another discussion session
At Dunya.
at Dunya, so we move to Dunya now. We have lunch here. Okay.
Outside.
All
And then
right.
we
After
go
the
to-
lunch.
And then
Thank you.
thank you very much.